Hey everybody, this is Jason Bosch, and I am with Alison McDowell. I came across this video with Sergey Nazarov of Chainlink and Eric Schmidt of Google, and I just thought there were some interesting things that were said in it. And I thought, hey, Alison, we should do a thing where we kind of pick apart some of this stuff, and then I know she has a lot as well that plays off of this. So that's kind of the purpose of this, was just to kind of start to do a little bit more of a dive into some of the, I'm interested in like the, what's the word I'm looking for? The ideological framework that people that, because I consider like these guys, Sergey and even Eric Schmidt is like, we talked about the games within the games, and like they have their own game that they're playing, and some of the mentality and some of the things that were said I thought were kind of interesting. So Alison, you watched it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was really interested. I've been looking a lot at the idea of the tokenization and transactional qualities, and I just finished a sort of a deep dive into that crypto skeptic conference, and realizing that often there's a great deal in knowing the broader landscape of things and noticing what's not said or what's left out or how arguments are framed. And so to me, it was interesting to hear the way in which they were talking about some of the, the tokenization and the asset classes as if they were only money and not really the larger Web3 apparatus in terms of like physical environments. So
yeah. So yeah, there's a lot we can talk about what's not in this as well. And so I don't know, why don't I just show some clips and we'll just go from there, and then we'll just kind of see where this takes us. The first one I start with is this discussion about faith in mathematics. I thought this was a very interesting framing.
I keep reading all of these claims that Web3 is going to take down Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and so forth. Having lived through that, I think that's pretty unlikely. And I think what you're going to ultimately see, and I want to be very clear, is you're going to see, let's use the generic term Web 2, Web 3, you're going to see Web 2 used in cases where you don't need the trustlessness, and but you can get the decentralization through centralization and centralization of power, which is how those companies work. And so I think the more likely scenario is you're going to see the traditional Web 2 stuff, but if you need something which is trustless, decentralized, right, and immutable, you're going to have very, very powerful systems. If you look at zero knowledge proofs and the development of that, which is it's been under development for a very long time, that will enable a completely new way in which you validate financial transactions. And part of the Chainlink vision is basically cryptographic truth is always the right answer. So your religion, if I can say it, is don't trust the human, trust the protocol, right? So roughly what way to say it. Well, that is a scalable model if you can get the technology to scale. And that's likely a major contribution to the computer architecture going forward.
Yeah, I think so. I think at the end of the day, people's faith in mathematics is going to end up being stronger than their faith in institutions and brands and other people, because the tendency that mathematical guarantees will have to fail them will be an extremely low percentage, whereas the tendency that humans and institutions and brands run by humans, those things will continue to, unfortunately, very unfortunately, they will continue to fail. And there'll be periods where they fail very little, and there'll be periods where they fail in, very rapid succession in big ways, like in the 2008 financial crisis. And, I would rather be building a system that's going to reconstruct the world in a reliable, guaranteed way than contributing to that.
So I thought that was probably the most poignant thing in the whole thing for me, because I think that gets to the heart of a lot of this. The mentality that drives a lot of this is this: you can't trust human beings, and you can trust math, and you can trust science, and this is the infallible thing that we all need to be striving for. What do you think about that, Alison?
Well, I've been playing around with some concepts the past week or so from that Physics as Metaphor book, and I did a site visit the other day, and he was positing this idea of space and separation in space, and the ideas back to the Middle Ages or more indigenous cultures' view of the world in which we habit as being one that's full of meaning and potential, into which we're embedded, and then the shift that happened with the Enlightenment that made it much more mathematical and geometric and unforgiving and cold. And so I feel like what's happening is that our relationality is being intentionally destroyed and led to be questioned, oftentimes through failures in these digital communications, whether intentional manufactured failures on purpose or unintentional, simply just bad functioning, to make us feel like we're not able to communicate one-on-one or with groups, and that therefore all of the institutions will fall apart. And often I've referenced this book, Yevgeny Zamyatin's We, which it's dry because literally it is very mathematical, but it's sort of this dystopia where everyone is just a number and nobody has any privacy and you're just programmed. And it's from 1921. So like people talk about Brave New World in 1984, but this is the earliest one. And like it's totalitarian, but he was in Russia, but ultimately it's mathematical totalitarianism. It could be used on either end of the ideological spectrum. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is when they're talking about having a mix of Web 2 and Web 3, which I think is accurate. And oftentimes the straw man that is lifted up for blockchain is they say, oh, there's no use case. Oh, we don't need a blockchain for this. Oh, we could just have a database. And they're just like poo-pooing this idea of a blockchain, not acknowledging, and I think oftentimes these are people who actually do know, it is the interoperability of the data and all of the metadata that is the value of the blockchain system, not just the security of it, but the way in which the relationality and the pattern making of all of that data. That's what they're really after. That's the use case of the blockchain. But they're right. You don't need to put every single darn thing on the blockchain. But when he's saying, oh, maybe for very high secure use cases, you need to use blockchain, he's framing that, this is Schmidt, as a financial transaction, right? Like we're doing some sort of wire transfer of money, which may be the case, but it is totally sidestepping the way in which tokenization of rights and privileges is going to be put on blockchain and tied to things like remote work, like this haptic robotic labor. Now we can maybe debate whether or not you putting in time for gig work to pilot a robot halfway around the world would require a Web 2 security clearance or a blockchain security clearance, right? Like maybe it depends on if you're working in the next gen nuclear plant, you need the blockchain one. And if you're just working in the nursing home, you need the Web 2 version. But the way in which these conversations are being had by people who very clearly know what's coming with cyber physical systems, they're providing all sorts of cover for what's actually, you don't have to look deeply at this. I just went through and I looked at Ericsson's page and Nokia's page and NTT's page, and you can just pull out the Web3 cyber physical systems. It's all run on tokens and blockchain. So yeah, we're not ever talking about it like that. We're just pretending that all of these conversations like exist in a crypto wallet. And it's very disingenuous. It's very frustrating for me.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point too, is that it's going to be there's going to be lots of different layers to the system. There's on chain and there's off chain. It's going to be centralized and decentralized and distributed. And I actually want to do. I might even tack on a thing here where I explain the difference between. There's an image that's in this book that I'm reading that explains the difference between centralized, decentralized, and distributed. And it's actually not what I thought. My understanding of these words were actually totally inaccurate. And there's some other clips in here that are interesting in the way that Eric Schmidt talks, and he contradicts himself even within this talk here. But yeah, getting down to the point that it's the idea of it's not questioned whether or not tokenized access is even a good thing in and of itself. Like, that's just a given. Now it's just a matter of how do we best create the system that does the thing that we want it to do. Not we, you, and I. We, them,
Right.
them. You know, there's no debate on this. So yeah, that was interesting.
And I would just say too, they mentioned like these zero knowledge proofs and bringing them to scale, right? And again, we're not talking about the way in which the built environment, access to the built environment, including the commons, even including maybe things in your own private home or things linked to universal basic income or smart sort of shared assets, are going to be tied to these zero knowledge proofs. And that's something where, like, you know, you have an access code, whether in your wearable or in your wallet or whatever, that when you engage with something through a smart contract, that depending on your status of what you have in your digital wallet of tokens, that you can activate or not, right? And so these, and they will say that it's private. They will come up to you and they will say, well, look, you can be your own data self-sovereign identity system, that you can decide what you unlock and where you unlock it and how, if you're going to sell your data, and I'll look at you, you're your own free agent of data. And that's the story that's being told, is that story. And but what they're not saying is, like, when you walk up to the grocery store door, someday you might not be able to go in, and it doesn't really matter if it's private or not, right? Like, if you can't get in to get like the gallon of milk, that's a problem. And so these zero knowledge proofs, I would much prefer them be frankly honest and say, look, we're looking at a cyber physical system rollout. Our time frame is 20 to 30 years. We think it will look like this. We think it will start in the cities, or we think it will start in the refugee centers, or we think it will start in the opportunity zones. And we're going to try this out and we're going to see how it goes. Like, that would be an honest conversation with society, is to say, like, we have some ideas about how this could work with zero knowledge proofs and digital identity and cyber physical systems. And we want to see how people feel about it. But and surely Schmidt knows that. Google Alphabet knows that. That's all of their business. You know, mobility solutions and mapping and keyhole and your content and, you know, your smart home and your smart health. And they know. And all the people who work for them know. And it's tens of thousands. Maybe 100,000 people work for these companies, and they know. But they've, like, it's like that TV show Severance. Like, you know, like, maybe not exactly, but somehow they separate out their work self from the rest of their life, and they don't stop to think about, like, hey, this little project that I'm the project manager for, it fits into this much bigger thing that we should actually stop and think. Because I don't know how we dial it back once we go so far down this road. And it's frustrating to see the two people who are, like, the experts, and I'm sure there's probably nobody in that room who's asking these questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like the room is majority people that are, like, working for Chainlink or supportive, because whenever they interact with the audience, it's like they're part of the team sort of thing. I don't think this was just like I don't know, like, it probably was open to public if somebody wanted to get a ticket, but it was just, the way he's talking to the audience is kind of like he was talking to his employees or something. Sergey, I'm talking about. There's a couple other clips here that like weren't directly related to that, but I just thought they were interesting. Where he's talking about recession. So yeah, I just thought this was interesting admission on his part. Not that he supports this, mind you. So
let me ask the audience: are we going to have a recession in the next 12 months in the U.S.? The guys over here are in favor of it. Okay, over here you're in favor of it too. Do you know why a recession would be good for all of us? It would get labor prices down, right? So, and I'm not endorsing recessions, trust me. I would answer the question by saying, first, I think we make our own weather in our industry. We make our own economics. And the way you win is you build a product that solves a real problem, and you do it now, and it takes off. So if you're in a downturn, it's the same message as if you're going well, right? A downturn is easier to hire because people become more labor available and their demands for compensation and so forth become more realistic. But it's the same rule, right? You're trying to build a product that's a breakout product, right? And I have historically ignored, as a matter of business, what was going on in the public markets. The tech industry has always had lots of capital because of software. There's infinite amounts of money to invest. The valuations that are being raised in this cycle are still high relative to normal metrics. If you look at AI, which again I've spent most of my time on, the next generation of startups are being raised at $200 million, billion kind of valuations with 10 people and no product. It's just insane stuff. Thank God the capital markets can provide that kind of capital for this generation of founders. So I'm not at all worried for us. I'm worried about the globe. I'm worried about the war. I'm worried about food. I'm worried about gas prices. I'm worried about all of that. But for our world, which remember is not normal, we're not normal. We have our own little ecosystem. Sorry, Sergey.
Definitely not normal, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, and you and I especially.
So yeah, there's a lot there actually. There's several different things. I mean, I'll start with the recession thing. There was actually a clip that I want to find this clip again because it was such a great clip of oh shoot, what's his name? The Federal Reserve Chair from back in like the day. There's an old clip where he was actually advocating for recession, you know, like we need to get the labor prices down. So I thought that was interesting because it's kind of, it is true. That is true. But then he says like, oh, I don't support that. Of course he supports that. And he says, you know, get it down to what's reasonable. And most, you know, people in the world would say that it's not reasonable the amount of money that they get paid for the work that they do. Leaving aside the work that they do is a large percentage of it is actually really horrible work and they shouldn't be doing it. I would argue a lot of the work that's being done is has some ethical issues. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting admission, even though he's like trying to play both sides on the recession. Thoughts on the recession thing? And then there's a couple other things in there that...
Well, I would say because of my work in the education space, like what I was realizing with both the digital identity and the standardized, you know, Common Core, and it's just coming out in the open with Charles Hoskinson, you know, and that Ethiopia clip about, you know, we're aligned with the government and we'll know who track them from preschool to know who is a good actor and who is worthy of having a job, right? But even well before that, 3 or 4 years before that, I was saying stuff like, wait a minute, like I am seeing that the plan is to engineer the economy for the work for industry, right? And so if the schools and the education systems are literally delivering human capital to industry, there's nothing saying that industry won't ask for maybe 30% more than it needs so that it can cream the best people and suppress the wages, right? Like I was thinking about that back in 2015 or 16, that actually isn't any, I mean, I'm not saying I'm totally about the free markets, but that isn't that. But people would come in and say, oh, the socialists are doing that. And I'm like, no, that's Exxon and IBM are doing that. Like they're the ones running the training academies to serve Exxon and IBM. That's how this is coming out of the US Chamber of Commerce. And as far as I'm concerned, I mean, not that the ideology, all of these labels just pivot everybody into the social physics, but you know, there's this sniping back and forth, but I think we could generally agree that there are issues within the blockchain space of planned economies and planned labor, and that they're not benefiting the workforce. They're not there to benefit the worker, to uplift the worker and provide life-sustaining wages, family-sustaining wages. Schmidt's just said, like, we want to cut back as much as possible. And then this goes along with what Richard Baldwin has said about the globalization 4.0, which is telepresence labor, which is remote work that now includes haptic robotics. And it's the social physics of that, right? And so now it's not just that US workers are being planned through ONET and their digital badges and stackable credentials and Lumina's funding it forever, life on the ledger, but now we're competing, now American kids are gonna be competing with kids in Latin America, right? Or kids in Africa, kids in Polynesia. I mean, people with very different costs of living. And what I'm saying is like, none of this is taking down, like, addressing the domination system. None of this is addressing what's happening with the concentration of wealth and power in small numbers of companies, many of which have ties to defense and finance interests. It's not doing anything for that. So we need at a global level, as like people like me who might consider themselves elders, to stand up and say, no, like the youth of tomorrow deserve to have dignified work that is fulfilling, that lets them use their talents to support their families. And there's enough for everybody in the world if we could just revisit the domination system. Like, it's not based in nationalism. It's not based in ideology. It's simply based, like, we're running into the maw of this cybernetic soul killing machine, and we're calling it, you know, an engineered economy. Only it's clearly being engineered by people like Schmidt and the people in the room who are clapping for him.
Yeah.
And they're not normal, and they admit that they're not normal. So why should any of us listen to him other than they're running the open air prison planet from their keyhole mapping systems?
Right. When he also talks about, like, you know, this basically we're protected, you know, the recession is going to hurt a lot of people. He didn't actually say that, but I mean, we all know that that's what happens. But we're in this room, we're protected. So we have lots of money. We don't have to worry about that. And, you know, like you said, we're special. You know, they live in a bubble, and also thinking about where that money comes from, because they don't have to, it would be interesting if someone, you'd never get a university to actually do this. Well, I mean, they would lack the access to a lot of the information they would need to properly do it, but to do a real analytic study on the funding, from government funding to private nonprofit NGO funding to even black, what do you call that? Like when it's off the records or whatever, but like the intelligence, you know, it's clear the intelligence services and that whole industry they have a lot of access to money. And of course money is, you know, I talk about this all the time, but we can create as much money as we want to do whatever we want with. So they're saying we have unlimited money. We can just do whatever we want. We don't even have to operate within the confines of like a regular market-based thing, because we can just, you know, it's kind of like the banks can just overrun their balance sheets, and then the Federal Reserve will come in with quantitative easing and just, you know, fix it. So like they don't have to go by the same set of rules that normal people or even normal businesses do. And I think that's really important to consider. And again, they're making these rules, the protocols, and I'm going to be talking a lot more about protocol. So I was always supportive of like decentralization. You know, because I'm someone that's kind of like leans kind of more anarchist, in the sense that, like, you know, I want people to have free will, and as long as you're not hurting anybody, I'm kind of like in that kind of camp. And so like decentralization is a very, at least from what I understood of it, was actually very appealing to me. It was because I was always like, we don't need to take the power, we need to get rid of the power. Like, no one should have, whether it's a corporation, a government, a church, or whatever, whenever you have concentrations of power, you know, it gets abused. And so I in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, decentralization is a way to do that. But then you have, you know, Eric Schmidt of Google, and you have, you know, all the intelligence and all these apparatuses that are actually promoting decentralization. And you go, well, wait a minute, maybe this isn't what I thought it was. And so anyways, so I was looking at, you know, I've been kind of delving into protocol. What is a protocol? Protocol is basically just the rules everybody goes by, the rules that all the computers operate on. And the centralization is in the protocol. The protocol is the centralization. The management, you know, can be automated to a large degree using AI and using oracles and all these other things, using incentives. You know, the oracles get incentives, and you check and make sure that the oracles are doing what they're doing within the protocol. So that's the law. That is the new law. The new law is protocol. And so, but it flips it on its head, because a lot of people that are in these spaces genuinely are thinking that this is taking power away from the big guys, and it's actually not.
Well, yeah. I mean, and I would say once you start to understand that the financial structure, and as you've understood it for a long time, that our understanding of money is sort of flawed. Like, we think it's one thing, but it's not actually the thing that we often think it is. It's more about like system regulation, that certain people are managing and can make up new rules. But if you realize that it's about sort of modulating systems, like social systems, environmental systems, through diverse constructs, which we're now seeing. Like we're gonna see emerging many different tokenomics principles. And I think in some ways, the people who are like single-mindedly focused on central bank digital currency are not helping our case, because it's going to be some combination of that and the other things that are linking in and exchanges until it sort of sorts itself out. There will be this sense of things burbling up, but what they want is the exchange system. And so it's like swarm intelligence. The way in which you use your currency tells us something about you. It tells us about your values. It tells you about who you're connected to, how the extent of that connection, depending on the size of the transacting, the numbers of transactions. There's a lot of metadata attached to how we transact energetically in these places that can be monitored. And so in that, they don't want decentralization, because what the AI most wants is a bunch of different unique experiences that it can use to model, because it's learning us like it hasn't learned us yet. And so in many respects, the distributed, decentralized, self-sovereign, open, they need that because they want us to be that for now. Like at some point it will coalesce and harden and they will pull back in. But for now it's like a dog when you have it on one of those expandable leads, and you like let it spiel out, and we think we're like, oh, look, open, decentralized. And then they're like, Kurr! And then, they step it back. And I feel like we're in the like running out lead part, but we're still on their harness. Yeah. And most people, especially in the more anarchist libertarian spaces, are not aware of the bigger game, or if they're aware, they're not really talking about it openly. They're still pretending that it's about money, as we currently or have traditionally understood it, not that it's about energetic exchanges, relationality, data, and modeling social systems towards some larger emergent information life form that they think they're doing.
And just to clarify, I don't fall within the anarchist libertarian camp as it exists.
I'm not saying that.
No, I know you weren't. But I just, for people that are watching, just so you know, like, because to me, I always had this whole issue with, and I've talked about this before, like anarcho-capitalism. I'm like, wait a minute, like capitalism, money, like they're all about money and property, and these are constructs of the law. And the law doesn't need to be the law. The law can be a protocol. The law can be a code that's implemented by a computer. But I realized that like
problem, Jason.
Huh?
That's going to be a problem.
It is a problem. Well, and then I realized that it's a contradiction.
Sorry. You can't do that.
You can't be an anarchist and a capitalist. Like, sorry, those two things don't go together, because if you're submitting to having all your operations through this money that is created by the central bank, or it's created by some, private issuer or whatever, they have the issuance of those tokens, coins, or dollars, or whatever has an immense amount of power. It's not value neutral. How it's created, the rules that you have to go by within that framework, who has it, who doesn't, how it's administered, has a huge effect. It's not value neutral. And so like you're not free within that. And then also property, like we go on about property, but like there is no property without the law. I mean, there's possession. I can pick up a rock and I'm holding this rock, but that's not what property is. Property is a legal a legal claim on a land or other material or people's labor now. I mean, capital. So yeah, the libertarian thing always drove me a little bit nuts, because it makes no sense to me whatsoever. If you're genuinely anarchist, you have to oppose that as well.
But I would say, like, even within that, like the thing that I've been trying to, like the post that I just made was about this crypto skeptic symposium. Like, there's a pendulum there's the tokenized cooperative pendulum, and then there's the individual, like, libertarian, freedom token. Like, so there are these two things, but then the challenge is once you opt to represent your system of exchange in a way that's machine readable, mm-hmm. And that maybe doesn't even have to be blockchain. I mean, I was just talking with our friend in, going back about Dee Hock and the head of Visa, who was in Ogden, Utah, and thinking like, wow, well, I really think going back to the 70s that the credit cards, they probably always knew that they were going to be digital money. Like maybe like they knew that the networked computer systems would be the thing 50 years out. They knew it would get smaller, faster, more nimble. Maybe they didn't know exactly like from the big mainframe computers how it would go, but they must have known in the 70s where they anticipated this would lead, you know? And so when they developed the credit cards, yeah, I think they must have known that they would be represented later more in bits and, you know, with a whole different physics of payment systems. And, you know, it's kind of crazy to think about it like that, but I think they probably did. And did they identify a digital wallet? Like, you know, I don't know. Like, it's interesting to think about, but I don't think these things just popped up out of nowhere. I think they come from long histories of energetic entanglements. And so, yeah, I don't know how we do money. I don't have the answer of how to do money. What was the islands that have those big rocks or something?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Prudential? No. Yeah, I don't know how to do, because I've been looking at this for many years, and I've every single thing that I've looked at, like public banking or, you know, complementary currency or whatever, each one has its own set of problems, and it's always a trade-off. And even just generally, philosophically, you know, living your life through viewing everything in terms of what you can get for it or whatever. I think that there's something that's problematic about that in and of itself, like viewing everything as an exchange.
Right.
So, and that's why, you know, the ideas of a gift economy. I'm like, oh, I like that idea of like, you just give, and without any, like, you're not measuring, you're not expecting anything in return. But then even like the gift economy, like the language at least is being co-opted. So it's like, you can't, you know, try to strip it down to its bare and then let's have that conversation then work up from there. But we're always like, no, we've already built this stuff. We don't want to touch that, but let's like, maybe we can build another floor on top of it. We can build another layer on top of it that will fix all these problems down here. And it's like, well, maybe the foundation, you know, needs to be rethought itself or dismantled itself. But, you know, that's been our whole history, is just building on top of bad. This next clip he talks a little bit about compensation and scale. It kind of ties in with the last one, but
Tell the truth, and I'm historically a skeptic. And I'm a skeptic because although I like the beliefs and the values and the technology, I think the marketing got a little ahead of reality, which is okay. It's not the first, I mean, in the waves I've been in, this happens.
He's talking about Web3.
And let's start with the basic principles that Web3 and the work that you're doing is essentially trustless, immutable, and distributed. And those principles are really powerful for computer systems. That's why many of you got involved. And I looked at it and I thought, I don't think this thing's going to scale. I frankly just don't think it'll become big enough. And then you and a couple of other people started talking to me, and I think you were one of the inventors of this, about this basically a really crazy idea. Sorry. It's your idea.
It's fine. I'm crazy. I'm on board with it.
I think it's established. And so layer one I understood, but the concept of layer two, where you use tokens to incentivize behavior, was a really powerful development in the last, say, 3 years, 4 years, roughly when you started. And that changes the economics in some really fundamental ways. And I think this is a case where you all, people in the audience, are ahead of the academics, the economists who understand this. And a simple way to understand this is that, so you and I this is not going to happen because you're busy doing this company, you and I do a new company, and we decide to have a new coin. And the coin is initially relatively worthless. Maybe I'll seed it with some money. And its value increases directly with demand. Now, in my whole career, I've always had compensation tied to stock options, which was tied to corporate wealth and so forth. But the token, the fact that the token goes up in value based on network effects is a real discovery. And I don't think people understand quite the economics of this. I was talking to one founder who curiously wouldn't tell me his actual name. He had a code name. God knows why. And you never know. And I said, well, how do we do, I'm used to investing things and you get so much and I get so much. How much do you want? And he said, oh, we already know the answer. And I said, well, how much do I get? And he said, 20% of the tokens. And I said, good. How much do you get? 18% of the tokens. What goes to everyone else? He said, well, we need 30% of the tokens to stake the necessary network, to get the network working, get the validators on. We need about 100 validators. You've heard this speech before. Many of your chains operate this. And I said, I'm used to negotiating this. And I said, how do you know this? He goes, oh, there's a paper. This has been thoroughly studied. And he sends me the paper, right? So this economic structure is actually much more interesting than you all appreciate. It's a new way of tying compensation and incentives to network scale. That's a big deal.
It's interesting because that's actually those ideas are not new at all. They're actually hundreds of years old. The more people that use your coin, the more value it has. But they've actually built in, and I don't know all the dynamics of it actually, but basically, they're the more people that use it, the more valuable the coin comes. So it's a self-reinforcing system that will, because his issue was like, how can we get this to grow? How are we going to get this to grow? And by you pay people with coins that you can just make up out of there. It's like, this is not a new idea. Like it's just it's new technology. But and anyways, what are your initial thoughts on that little segment?
Well, I would say lately I've been thinking a lot about just the drama, like that this is sort of all a staged play a little bit. And you look at those two individuals and they're like, yeah, you made this company and we did this and there's a founder with a secret name. And it's pretty clear that these are not the people who are actually doing the thing. I mean, they're playing a role, that they're the person who is introducing this idea. But to me, I'm sure that this stuff goes back, knowing Ian Griggs working on the Ricardian smart contracts and all this stuff back to the 90s. There's a whole cadre of intellectual thought, some of it out in the public, some of it probably covert, of what is enabling these companies to happen, right? And who's dropping the $1 billion capital into these things. It's not just one person's good idea, or, I think that it's very coy the way they have this little back and forth. And again, there's games within games, the roles that they inhabit in this. But I think the idea of network effects, and once you tie the tokenization into alternative currencies, which is something I can't remember if that comes up later, but the complementary currency system are all behavioral, loyalty, reward points, governance tokens. The idea of tokenization to incentivize certain outcomes, and having that tied to value. And then again, who is this unnamed founder? Is it a machine? Hey, here's the paper that says exactly how we do it. And that's another story. Someone has decided that this is the story we tell. It's been thoroughly studied, 18%, 20%, 30%. But that's just a story that they're telling you. You're supposed to, look at XYZ PhDs on this paper, then it must be real. Okay. But it's part of the unfolding of the narrative. And so for me, when I hear him talking about the tokens and that we don't understand the implications of network effects and coordination and demand for the tokens, I'm just thinking back to the token economies in the classroom and how they're conditioning the children today with these online behavioral compliance reward systems, sometimes framed as anti-bullying or school climate or what have you, the class dojos, the red critters, Google has its own Classcraft. These gamified avatars where you are represented in a game to earn tokens that will then be used for acquiring digital assets or having a say in a decision-making process. That is an acculturation through tokenizations of today's youth. And so many of the conversations around like the hysteria around social emotional learning and the brainwashing, like, you know, the conservatives saying the left are brainwashing our children through social emotional learning. I'm like, well, the free markets want to like brainwash your children into a token economic system that is running liquid democracy. Like, what story are you living in? Because I don't think any of us want to live on chain. We don't want to live in a chain linked world. And so we need to zoom out enough to get out of their story and then actually look at it with a clear understanding of the contours of the forces at work and then make our own assessment of it. And then talk to the people next to us and say, this is what it looks like to me, and figure it out. Because we can't just sit back and listen to the stories they're telling. But we also can't listen to the noise of the social media sphere that is spinning things, the tokenomics, whether it be in a classroom economy or a green pill, you know, cello beautiful money economy, into these other stories. Because like, wow, it just hits me so hard the way in which we've been conditioned through media, visual media, even books, you know, the New York Times bestseller books, the NPRs, the radio stations, the TV shows, the TikToks, to think.
Not Oprah's books suggestions though, right? Don't burst my bubble here.
That's my 2 cents. I don't know. What do you think? Does that
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Anyways.
We're not just even having our own ideas about anything anymore.
Well, that's the thing that these tokens, or even like, you know, money, you know, does. And I've thought about this for a long time is, you know, you go to work for a job or you do this, your activity is restricted to what you're paid for, whether it's in tokens or whatever. And that's not coming from you. That's not coming from you. You're not sitting here analyzing this thing. You know, everybody needs to make a living, and, you know, so now they're going to shift it. You're going to need these tokens. Now you need these tokens to get access. You need this to get, and you don't have control of that. They're going to have some off ones where, you know, little community ones that people create, but it's not going to be useful to anybody. You know, I've have friends and other people that I know who have, tried to create their own complementary currency, and you know the currency is useless unless people are willing to take it. You know, so it's like, you know, I just saw these efforts fail, but there are players in the games who have the power to you know, create artificial demand for those tokens or for that money.
Well, Schmidt said it at the beginning. He's like, oh, should we have a recession? Oh, well, it's not going to affect us because we live in a bubble and we live under our own conditions.
Right.
So this world homeostat, the energy economy, like they're not in it. They're living in their own other version. And I think you had mentioned in some feedback on my blog post about like terms and conditions. Like these tokens are going to have some sort of fine print attached to them, right? And maybe we don't always read all the fine print. And you were making the point that sometimes they send you an email and they say they've changed the terms and conditions, right? They're like, oh, you know that hoard of tokens that you have in your wallet? Well, now we've decided that they're going to be, you have to use them in the next 6 months or they're expired. And they just change, you know, and then what are you going to do? You're going to go to the courts and fight about the tokens? You're not. You're just, so they can literally, the way Schmidt is talking about, can we make a recession? Can we engineer the money the way we want it to accomplish our end? Because we're...
Make our own weather.
Yeah, make your own weather. Exactly. He just says it right out there. Like, and once we're hooked on their Chainlink, yeah, no, we're at their whim. And you know, I was doing this whole looking at a talk from 2013 about with the complementary currency guy, and I can't remember his name. You said you had read his books, but
Bernard Lietaer.
Yeah, and he had said he'd been doing it for 20 years, and now it felt like the time was coming, right? But 2013 is pretty early in the crypto space, and Stacy Herbert's there, right? Of Stacy and Max Kaiser of the El Salvador Volcano Bitcoin crew, and she's there saying, "Yeah, I thought it was about money, but actually, it's really about governance." It's about tokenized governance. She was saying that in 2013. So they knew that it really isn't about money as we traditionally understand it. It's about the cybernetic control system and the social exchange. Like she was saying, like she used this example of some sort of monkey experiment where there were two monkeys in cages and the researcher would exchange a rock with one for a cucumber, but the other one got a grape. And the one who got the cucumber felt ripped off because it really wanted the grape. And so like then it just got outraged. And that like this new governance system of the Bitcoin blockchain was going to resolve all of that. Because if you did the work to earn the grape, you'd get the grape. And so they already knew that. And so all of this spectacle.
You're still in a cage.
You're still in a cage. Yeah. But you get the grape if you do the work for the grape, just like Charles Hoskins. We know if you're a good actor and then you're worthy of having a job and you can have the grape. And so it's interesting for me to see at this early stage and how her character has changed since then, because clearly that's not how they talk about it now so much. And but that they were with RT. Because the thing is, if what they're after is a social exchange documentation system, like to build up the neural net through energy tokenomics, metadata tagging to build this noosphere, and I'm not saying anything, against Russia, but like they're the ones that during the Cold War were very, very interested in psychical research and in the mind, in noetics, in that space of altered consciousness beyond the material. And that seems to be increasingly interlinked. We've had kind of a conversation on the discourse about engineered consciousness, where they will want to run neural economies in your mind, literally like hijack, sit on the neural net of your brain and ride into consciousness land and try to get in there. And so if we think about those economics, those energy economics, again, fractal, that's the tiny version. And then you zoom out to, communities and nations and globes. It's all a matter of scale, but I don't know. I found it quite fascinating knowing and at the top, Russia and the US, it's all the people at the top all know what the end game is. And they're all playing out the roles with oftentimes great harm to individuals and communities. I'm not saying the harm isn't real, but they're steering it. They're steering this ship into the omega point. And the economics and the tokenization are a huge piece of it.
Well, and here's that slide you sent me. There was actually... I wanted to download the slides, but you have to have an account in order to download. It was like, did you want to say
that's
something?
the thing. They changed the terms and conditions. Like last year, you could just download it. Yeah. Now this year, you have to be a member, or you have to pay money, or you get a trial.
And then they say, well, it's all transparent. Like you can read it. It's there in the fine print. You can read it. Like, who has time? First of all, you have to the language. You'd have to be a lawyer to even understand what is being said half the time. But not only that, it'd be a full-time job just to keep up with the things that are on
your robot, your
apps,
robot.
Right? The apps that are on your phone. You're not even going to be able to keep up with that. I mean, this whole thing is such a fraud, But it's open source and it's transparent and it's decentralized.
You can't get at it. Like when your wallet doesn't open anything, there's no one to tell about it. Well, so this is from one of Melanie Swan's slide decks. And again, she's connected both in the UK and at Purdue, the Sentient World Simulation. She's won some sort of, cardboard check for her Cloud Minds essay that we're going to, tokenize our thoughts and our intellectual property into collective consciousness with machines and animals and other things. Like that's how they're imagining it. But to me, like within the tokenization space, it is the tokens that are going to be tied also to these impact metrics. And that's something that Leo has talked about in Cello and the Ocean Protocol, is that like with IXO Foundation and IO2 Foundation, Shanzai City, that they're going to come up with ways of getting into people's homes, getting into nature with the drones, taking digital images or video, translating that into some sort of attestation of impact, and then feeding that through the Ocean Protocol into the machine to try to get their Frankensteinian information, emergent information life form that they think they're going to get. And within that space, Ocean Protocol, I think the guy's name is Trent McConaughey, maybe? I know it's McConaughey, I think it's Trent. He was talking about literally, and this is part of a talk I did with Shai in the noosphere, but Ocean Protocol, which is the holder of all of these, what they've set up is like cloud-based storage for impact tokens. So you have impacting human capital, impacting nature, impacting inclusion, impacting all these things. The data goes into this vast store warehouse and is private and secure. And then through tokenomics, AI systems or people can trade money or tokens to have access to that data to run analysis and computation. And I think there is something about Schmidt talking about having access to AI analytics in there. And that's part of it, is that they say, oh, you don't actually have to own the data or secure the data. We'll do that. But through tokenization, you can access it, run it privately, and then get the data out as a final, it's the results from the computation that doesn't have the personally identifiable information, and then use that for your analytics. And so there are these whole systems built on token trades among even AI to AI to get the analysis that they're trying to get towards the singularity. And McConaughey is saying through your submission or participation in extractive data economies, through wearables, through Internet of Things, through the photos, through algorithms you write, you can become like a micro digital entrepreneur in your data, either the software that you develop for the data or the data you input, and that you can be saving the world. You can be saving the world and solving poverty by participating through your token exchanges, so the AI can learn us. And that is, he had framed it specifically as self-actualization, which is part of this Abraham Maslow, like emergent man, this hierarchy of needs, which, again, to a certain extent, yes, we do have like the hierarchy of needs. There's some logic to it, but ultimately it is about the human potential movement, this optimization, this collective enlightenment and optimization, but it's always been attached to the machine. Like the story of physics as metaphor is you have these divergent worlds. One is organic, embedded, interconnected, emergent, symbolic, diverse, and then that's something that is more the ancient one that is dismissed. And then you have the newer, shinier one for the past 300 years that is geometric and linear and clean and cold and stark and manageable. And so what he's saying is, like, you have to live in the stark world and you have to trade your tokens, and that's how you self-actualize on these personal development contracts. And as you develop as you optimize yourself to the world built on crappy cold geometry and digital simulations, and as you get closer to being the you that someone has decided is the you that you need to be in that space, you earn tokens and you actualize. And then in your actualization, you're actually feeding the robots, like your soul, with these stupid soul-bound tokens. And that's what I think these development contracts with biometric utility function, imputation, and tracking. She's saying this in 2015, Jason. Like, where in the world are all of the resistance people talking about this? Like, darn it. Like, they talk about it in broad strokes. Broad strokes, and they never drill down and say what it actually looks like. And it looks like this. It looks like a utility token tied to your liberation cryptocurrency where you self-actualize through the AI. And it doesn't have to do with the ideology, and it doesn't have to do with the politics. It has to do with the domination system of enlightenment civilized systems.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're social creatures and we're not self-directed. So people are getting, I've dealt with this in activist communities of people, going with whatever the nonprofit NGO, program is, or whatever the political party program is, or their thought leader, or someone that they really like on YouTube or whatever, but people aren't
Not
actually, except for Alison. Oh, I thought you had a big cult following,
I'm
Alison.
not the likable one here and be like, she's not that likable enough. I don't think I'm
Right. Yeah, but I mean, it's like being self-guided, like saying like, no, actually like analyzing this stuff. And when you get new information, even if it challenges a lot of the assumptions that you have, that you take that information you incorporate it, and I think that, for some reason people don't want to do that. Like, I've had to change I've had to pivot and change my course several times in my life. I used to be I was more of like the libertarian capitalist guy, conservative back when I was in high school. And I've come a long way in terms of, the difference of worldview I have now is extremely different. But it's also because I try to be at least self-guided, and when I get new information that's relevant, I'll try to incorporate it in. So
yeah, but this is social prescribing. This is the social prescribing tied to the Sustainable Development Goals. And yesterday I went out to the B Lab, which is the Benefit Corporations, which is this new kind of new corporation for the new economy, which is about data and about impact. And I remember when I first saw the Sustainable Development Goals 17, and I'd never really thought about the UN before, right? But I'm looking at these goals and I'm thinking, shouldn't most of them be about the environment? But there were 4 or 5 out of the 17, and the rest were about managing poor people, managing children, managing your education, managing your health, managing smart cities, managing work, and all of it was setting up the rules of this game. And in that is where you're supposed to be optimized and self-actualized. And they will prescribe you things because really they want the robots to do your job. They've already thrown up their hands and said, one person can run 10 robots in 10 different Walmarts. 10 robots in 10 different Walmarts. That's the future that we're walking into willingly. And so what are we going to do? Well, you sit at home and you self-actualize. Here, put on this VR headset. Why don't you play some Wii games and get your heart rate up, right? Why don't you do some, this wearable, and we'll do some meditation, and we'll track you when you're doing that, because they want your heart rate, they want your brain waves, they want all of this. We're becoming the pets of the AI. We're going to be their gerbils. We'll be lucky if they give us some toilet paper tubes or something every once in a while, smart toilet paper tubes. How fast did they chew up the toilet paper tube? I mean, but that's the social prescribing. And I have a whole presentation I need to make on social prescribing, because it wants what it is to be social. That's what it wants. It wants to know, what do you like? Who do you like? Who do you hang out with? Who do you hate? What annoys you? What do you love? What stories captivate your imagination? But don't have an imagination yourself. Don't actually, because you're only allowed to do what we tell you.
They're pre-designed categories that it wants to put you into that, are you what's it, the personality thing? Are you a 1 or 2 or 3? Even that was I think it's more complicated than that, but okay. So this next clip is just kind of talking about the Oracle. So for those of you who don't know, the way Chainlink works is you have these oracles that are incentivized. They're paid with tokens in order to provide information that then they verify with other oracles whether or not it's true or not. And then if it's true, so it's the information, the data that we're providing is accurate, because we have all these oracles that we're paying them, and then if they give us information that turns out not to be true, they get docked. And so it's a system that's set up to basically supposedly provide accurate data for market research or climate. Well, it could be anything. It could literally be anything. So is
this related to the fact that it's not all on chain because it couldn't scale energetically? So it's facilitating between off chain and on chain.
Yeah. So there's some technical problems with all of this, because the vision, they can't have everything on chain. And also they talk, I don't know if it's this clip, but there's another one where they talk about someone that has a lot of, you have an employee that works for your company that can give a 5-star review, and then all of a sudden all the companies have 5-star reviews. But they wanted to set it up to where it's trusted, you have specifically trusted. So it's solving the problem. It's solving a couple different problems. One of them is also scalability. But another problem is making sure that everyone that's contributing to it is supposedly being honest about the information they're providing. But of course we know with the media that even in large scale you can get the majority of the population to believe something that is actually not accurate. And then the whole narrative around fake news, which is kind of funny because you have like, you know, Democratic Party hacks or whatever going off about fake news, and it's like, or the media people is like most of the problems with the most destructive problems, I would say. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of wacky stories just randomly on the internet, but the ones that actually have a real impact on the world is the fake news coming from mainstream sources and professionals. You know,
well,
so
I would say, I mean, if you consider the quote unquote fake news narrative within the idea of information management, right? Because they want to create, like, push us into a reality that is made of information, that's digital information that they can change at will in this immersive reality. And so they need to destabilize our ability to trust anything, or to use our own assessment of how we view information and where it fits into our own personal cosmology and our own value system as to what information is trustable or not, because there is no one reality. People are occupying different stories based on their life experience. So yeah, there's information. It's all curated in some respect, intentionally or unintentionally. We don't all have access to all the information, or our brains would explode. So even the creation of the trust narrative implies that there is one single reality that is trustworthy. Mm-hmm. Which maybe they can do in the immersive reality if it's based on trust tokens. And that's the Truth Commission. And that's why Pierre Omidyar is backing so much of this, as well as digital identity, as well as the journalism, investigative journalism. Is so when you live in immersive reality, whether that's your nano projections on the wall of your house or the VR headset or what have you, the reality that's delivered to you, you're supposed to believe it because there's a trust stamp. That it's trustworthy by the authorities. And that is the Truth Commission. And you will not get access to anything that doesn't have the trust stamp. So that means essentially in the world of bits, they have absolute power to make reality anything they want.
Yeah, well, and that's what Chainlink is. It's that trust stamp. It's the blue check mark or whatever. It's saying this is accurate information, and we know it's accurate because all of our oracles are saying that it's accurate. And I don't. There's more to it. There's more to this than I don't understand, because it certainly isn't just. A popularity thing, like I think there has to be other aspects to this that I don't understand. Of like all of their oracles agree, and therefore it is true. And then determining who gets to be an oracle, and we see that with the we saw that with the fake news thing of like, oh well, these are our trusted people. These are the people, the blue check mark. I mean this is like the blockchain version of the blue check mark. Everyone.
It's kind of like it depends on which tokens you get, like which information you have access to, because you can have a pile of information that are all accurate facts of things that happened, and you can leave out key bits of information that would give you an entirely different lens. True. Like, I've talked about like the Cold War and not knowing about Milton Eisenhower and not knowing about Atoms for Peace and not knowing about like that part of history was, unless you were clued into it and it was something you were studying, no high school kid knows about Atoms for Peace. Like nobody knows this. It doesn't mean it's not factual, but that is kept off the table so that the other narrative advances. And so what I'm saying is like these oracles, they'll probably come up with some levels of hierarchy of information management, that some is lower ranked and some is upper ranked, just like the Google page ranks. And so it'll reinforce the predominant narratives that serve the empire.
Right. And all of the oracles that, all the information all the data that's acquired isn't just it's not all just public or whatever. It's like you can hire, Chainlink, from what I understand, and, I could be wrong about this, but from what I understand, like a company could hire Chainlink to verify some data on something using their oracles. And it's not, that wouldn't necessarily be public information. It would be, okay, well, we'll sell you this information, that our oracles have all shared. That's what I understand. But I'm sure there's lots of different applications for this. It's not just going to be one thing. It's going to be, it sounds like it's kind of a foundational. It seems to me like Chainlink is meant to be foundational in the way that Google is now foundational, and they talk a little bit about.
Like some of this is. like, I'm just thinking about manifesting, like the way in which if this is a performance, right? Like in terms of making an impression, setting an intention, like to have those two men sitting there, like if what you're saying is that Chainlink is the next Google, like like the ARC may be this next thing, simply to have those two men in the room having this little chatty conversation about things they totally know and obscuring a lot of other stuff is a way to establish the arc, the trajectory of what goes forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's videos online about Chainlink that kind of explain about what they do, which I'm sure are leaving out a bunch too. So I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it. But anyways, here's another clip.
So first you have the layer ones, then you have the various layer twos, and the layer two provides all the necessary services. And now you have a problem of cross-chain, right, which is something Chainlink works on pretty well. And you have all of the problems of centralized systems in a distributed context because of this new invention. So the way I approach this, just to really answer your question, is I say I've got these layer one systems, I've got layer two systems, and how am I going to build a real scalable business? Today, we're not there. And we're not there because, frankly, and I hope most of you know this, most of the services that you use, which I think are Web3, are really hosted on Web2 cloud services. So an article I was reading, I assume it's true, you never know, is that 2/3 of the Ethereum computations are done on the 3 cloud providers, including the one that I like the most, Google. That's not decentralization. I talked to another person who said, be careful about real decentralization. You want to understand where the control points are. And even the current decentralized systems have ways in which they are centralized. For a while, before China banned it, 51% of all the miners were 3 companies in China. And as you know, with Bitcoin and the protocol, they can basically take over the whole protocol with that level of concentration. Today, that's not true, but you get the point.
I do. I really do.
This is what you're working on.
Well, I would say that Chainlink Oracle networks create large committees of identified nodes where you can choose the decentralization that you want to achieve without having dynamic membership that creates 3 or 4 pools under the control of one mining pool operator. Yeah, I would say in that sense, yes, if you want a network of 100 nodes to do a very specific computation for you, you can choose the 100 nodes, you can choose the jurisdiction they're in, you can choose the trust assumptions you want to have with them, you can choose their commitment to you, and those are all choices you should be able to make and to create that type of decentralization in a very explicit way rather than a dynamic membership way that creates these large mining pools.
Yeah, and my overall point is I think that you just described a whole new industrial system that's not very well understood outside of this room.
Once again, very much in agreement with you. Kind of uncanny how you're getting to the core of the issue, having that you've arrived very recently, but it's really quite, recently to the conference, not like to the industry. But
recently to the industry too.
Okay, well then it's very impressive and it's amazing. The guy's getting to the core of the issue and like.
So what are you going to do? What are you going to do to fix it?
Well, I actually see more and more computation moving into Oracle networks because blockchains don't fulfill the scalability or privacy properties. And if they fulfill those properties, then that's fine. That computation can go there. But I think there'll be an interim stage where they won't fulfill those requirements. And so there needs to be a bridge, just like blockchains couldn't fulfill the requirement of providing data. There are all these requirements that you have to build more advanced applications to really realize Web3. And all those requirements are really what Oracle networks seek to fulfill. Some of them will fall away and go into, a blockchain, but many of them won't. It's just not very easy to predict which requirements will fall away and which won't. But we're building a pretty flexible system that, as you can tell, provides data, identity, randomness, cross-chain soon, all these things. So, that's my plan to solve it, is to basically plug all the holes, and then the holes that are left are probably very valuable holes to keep filled. And that's where I think the value will land in that decade, half-decade time series.
Yeah. So the Oracle, again, this is, to think it's like, oh, it's just going to be blockchain or that. It's like clearly like there's a place for the blockchain. There's a place for the oracles. There's an intermix between Web 2 and Web 3. It's going to be centralized, decentralized, and also distributed. And I'll get a graphic. There's a graphic that I've got in this book. I just need to take a photo of it and put it up. But it just basically shows how, centralized, you have like one central authority, and then everything splits out from that. Decentralized is you have actually several centralized authorities that things split out from. Distributed is like a web, like where it's, what people thought of like the internet as being initially was just any computer can talk to any computer. But even in a distributed system, you still have protocols, TCP or whatever protocols, the rules that it has to go by. But now they're talking about embedding rules beyond just like how does this computer talk to that computer, like you pick up a telephone, you can have a conversation with somebody. The phone needs to be able to talk to each other and share that information, but the new protocols are actually going to be more aggressive in terms of shaping and social behavior and all of that. So but anyways, I just thought that was an interesting discussion where they talk about, having, you need to, know where your control points are, right. and you get this, and then you can give an image where people think, oh, it's free. It's, it's decentralized, but not really seeing it for what it actually is, that it is, controlled in many ways. I don't know. What were your thoughts on that clip?
That one was a little bit harder for me to figure out the oracles and all this stuff. I guess, I do think the control points are important. I mean, the challenge is understanding the story. Even understanding Google as a private company. I don't feel like these big companies are actually real, they're an extension of this apparatus, right? Amazon wasn't just an online bookseller, right? Amazon Cloud is hosting the all of the surveillance networks and the FBI and everything. So we're told a story that's hey, this is super convenient and you can order books. And then 15 years later, oh, and you can get some groceries too and dog toys. And, oh, but by the way, it's also hosting the entire surveillance, huge amounts of the CIA special security things. And that doesn't just happen. That's not just a guy. That's this structure. So
right.
You're sitting there talking about the layers and the holes and filling stuff in. I keep thinking what is this thing? Because I think that's something that we continue to fall into, these holes of the nationalism or multinational corporations and governments, and the metaverse, the immersive extended reality is, they mean it to be the world, because the next phase of globalization is moving bits around the world at crazy speeds to represent knowledge, labor, data, physical labor through these robots. And so everybody's got to be in on it. So where does Alibaba fit in with Amazon and Google and these bigger entities? And, as much as I do these deep dives, and I've been digging into this so deeply, and I think it's hard for people to keep up, but I don't even have the tip of the iceberg probably on what this thing actually is. And then, can we get there? I don't know if we can get there. Does it matter if we get there? I struggle with it because, again, it's all of this information management. Some of it's hiding in plain sight. It's not really hidden. And then there's a whole heck of a lot of stuff that's off the books that we'll never know about. And so I just struggle when I hear them just doing this chit chat, oh, you're new to this industry and you're doing so good. Figure out. That's
amazing. You're just putting it all together after just showing up.
Yeah, right. It's this is a dumb play. I don't like this plan. I don't want to be tracked by drones and satellites for the rest of my life so that I can like live as an avatar in Japan or something like.
Well, I think like our compartmental thinking is what prevents us from seeing the thing as a whole. And when I started to kind of wrap my mind around like Hegelian dialectic, you have the thesis and the antithesis, but together they make a synthesis. The two things together make a whole. And so thinking about the narratives, a lot of people, most of the people within, this blockchain crypto space, smart contract, Ethereum, are on the, government bad, government regulations bad, and, private is good. And then there's people on the other end of this, of that dialectic, that it's like, no, the private businesses are bad. And, just getting to the point where you can see them as one, like they're not, it's not this versus that. It's like, we know intelligence has played a huge role in the creation and development of a lot of these big companies. And but who's wagging who? It's not. I think we need to get past looking at these things as separate things and looking at as a whole, like it's a system. This is one part of it. This is one piece of it. You have your nonprofits, your NGOs, you have your political parties, you have your corporations, you have your banks, you have your governments, and seeing as one thing in some ways. And it's obviously with different parts, but you find out that they're actually working in concert. The ship is steering in a certain direction. And it's not, people want to think of like, oh, these things are counter to the government's plans, and it's like, no, it's not, or vice versa. The government, if we get the government to step out, it'll counter the negative things that the corporations are doing. And, we need to rethink how we think about it.
Yeah. And I think if we can, again, like consider Web3, like the way in which we transact in all ways within this immersive web of energetic contracts is feeding the AI. And I do sort of feel like so many of the dominant storylines in the resistance around, central bank digital currencies or Chinese social credit scoring, or, they miss the part that it's about the AI. Like we're never getting to the point, like, yeah, and they're putting it in a game, which is the goals. These goals are not just the dark UN taking over the US Patriots. It's a gaming system. Like y'all are all out there gaming, or lots of people, right? Like, how the games work. There are structures, there are rules, there are leaderboards, and you perform in the game, and then you get these exchanges, and that documentation of those ticks that you get added to your avatar, leaderboard, that is training the AI on they want us to humanize the machine. And they want us to humanize it through our money. And especially, and that's what's come out so clearly to me in looking into Ian Grigg and this digital flower currency, is and Cello, how Cello is an extension of this beautiful money idea. They want to link our inner emotional states, our relationality, into this external object, which is some sort of energetic representation that we trade around, and that it can be tracked. And I would feel better if that were becoming more a point of investigation of people who could expand their analysis beyond, it's the Board of International Settlement, or it's the central banks, or it's this, like, into like, well, how does the transacting and the data, the metadata tags attached to the payment systems that will be, the intention is that these be widely distributed with edge computing and new sorts of technologies that we can't even fully foresee, but likely involve some sort of, nanotechnology or, behavioral biometric tracking systems and edge computing, that there are these latent sensors with very low energy, that everything's covered in nanodust. And as we walk up to the, something, like it activates, like the frequency systems in both the nanodust on the built environment or the natural environment, and the thing resonating in our body through optics or photonics registers some digital exchange that is whatever we will be calling money in this new crazy game. And that's the stuff I'm interested in, is how do we figure out that? Because I think it's the two things of, one, they want to organize information sufficiently to create an intelligence that somehow they imagine as being alive from organized information. And the organized information has everything to do with how we're tagged and tracked and organized through blockchain systems and chaining systems. And then they also want to sort of colonize us in this sort of parasitic way to get to be the human part, like that thing that this energy, this predator, like they want to get into that consciousness space too. Yeah. So there's the two parts. It wants to sort of create the simulacrum that's pretending to be alive, and it also wants to sort of, I don't know, manage us in the space. And I feel like a couple, not this past June, but the one before, on the solstice, some of us went camping and we set this intention on the Susquehanna. And at this campground that we were at, it was the tail end of the cicada, the swarm, the whatever locusts had come out like in these vast numbers. And it was 3 weeks in. So they said originally like the whole ground was just covered with like inches of these cicadas that were in the process of mating and dying or whatever. And by the time we got there, there weren't so many, but they were kind of still all over the place. But many of them had this weird fungal disease that essentially, and I know like this is related, it made their abdomen, like their sexual organs of their abdomen fall off, like this fungal thing, but it made them also incredibly sex crazed, which is how the fungal thing spread. It was like, so the thing that it most wanted, it didn't have the functionality to do. And the fungus had hijacked the body of the cicada to do this thing that was also impossible. And that's why I kind of feel like we're at with this weird AI thing, is that like it's trying to like, and I mean, that's not the only thing. They're like zombies, some sort of fungus that turn ants into zombies. Like there's I'm not saying we're all zombies yet, but like there's this intention of trying to like let me tokenize you and turn you into an avatar and like try to zap you with some sort of like synbio thing. And then like maybe I could sit in the apparatus of your mind and see what this thing is. And I think that's an intention. I don't know how it's totally going to manifest, but I think, yeah, that if we just stop at central bank digital currency, we're not going to get there. We're going to miss out a whole big section, which is the AI machine learning consciousness manipulation part.
Well, thank you for that lovely image of the zombified insect sex crazed eunuch. Is that what they call eunuch? Yeah. That's awesome.
But the world showed that to us. Like nature tells you. I mean, that's the thing. There was some reason. Like that was a very powerful. Yeah. Some really, and that was a story. Like the world.
Well, that's what marketing is. It's kind of like it's all about getting you to want something, and then like not get it or like not want it after you get it. I don't know. I guess maybe that's a stretch, but I was just thinking about like trying to translate this into like the human reality. Yeah. Well, here, let's watch.
It's kind of like a digital twin, too. Like if it can like create this representation that it can control through mathematical modeling. And then try to push it back through to the real person. And I'm not sure that that's actually ever going to work, but that they're even thinking about it makes me mad.
Yeah, for sure. And like as far as the AI and like the predator energy, like I kind of use that as a metaphor, but I don't really know what's going on. Like there's a lot of this stuff that's just kind of, because I don't even understand like what makes someone want to dominate, like someone else. To me, it's not like I get a big house and I get whatever. Like that doesn't even make sense to me. Like, yeah, I'd like to have a nice house, but like I don't want to harm anybody in the process. So like there's a lot of this that I don't.
The harm is removed. Like we're at a distance from the harm.
Right.
So we don't
for sure.
And as someone who like I took classes in material culture at Penn, when I got my historic preservation degree, and I kind of loved it, like material culture and historic interiors, and you go and you read people's inventories of their wills and like imagine how it was set up in the room and all this stuff. And like the opulence of, the affluent upper middle class in the Victorian era, but you don't necessarily think like, oh, the money that allowed that to happen, like, was built on enslaved people or colonization or theft of resources or things, because it somehow feels removed a bit, right? Like the money, there's some spacing between the brutality of the system of extraction and then when it shows up in a fancy parlor. And, it was a long time before I really sat with it and I was like, oh yeah, that's actually, as much as I enjoyed that at the time, like, it wasn't right. Like there's things that were not right about that, but it's meant to be obscured. And that's the way I think when I'm trying to, go to these like derivatives traders, like the people doing mathematical modeling for financial derivatives, and saying, you're doing this to toddlers on surveillance play tables. Like, let me tell you what this actually is attached to, because you're looking at it as a mathematical equation or some sort of waveform or some sort of prediction modeling thing that's in this abstracted, like, geometrical environment that you're talking about to try to make somebody money. But dial it back just a little bit, and then you've got like children who are harnessed into surveillance tech, and we actually have to be prepared to look at that and then figure out like how to not do that anymore.
Right. When people don't think outside of their own participation in the transaction, like even with the money, if you're like, oh, I made so much money, I was like, no, actually you received some money that the banks created or whatever, but their own interaction is, oh, I went to work and I got paid. As if there's nothing outside of that. Or, you have a derivative, like, I invested this and I got this back. That's the end all be all for everything. Well, here, let's go through some more of these.
So one way to think about what you're doing in Web3 is you're trying to recreate all the practices that exist in current cloud services, but in a decentralized platform. That's one way to think about your strategy. And to me, the most interesting question are, what are the new services that are not easily done today in cloud? Right? I mean, there's a straightforward list in cloud, right? Because the cloud stuff just replaced the stuff I used to do before cloud existed, right? So it's file services, scheduling invocation, figuring out how to run services and so forth and so on. There will eventually be some sort of Ethereum, zero knowledge virtual machine. Today, the smart contracts are pretty, let me just say, poor in their capabilities. And that functionality should get there because of all the research that's being done in the industry. To me, the question is, what can you then do that you can't do today? And one of the most obvious things is doing distributed analytics over these kinds of decentralized systems. Because when you talk to the banks, they roughly, in some cases, know what's going on in their own banking system, but they have no idea what the other ones. And when you talk to the banking regulators, they have no visibility into anything. So imagine a system where you have extremely good analytics that are cross-chain, and these bankers can actually say, holy crap, we're just about to have a crisis.
So a lot of this, I think, is actually story, because, I actually think a lot of the crises are manufactured, but.
Yes, of course they are. That's ridiculous. Like, the bankers are going to steer it to not crash. Literally, the guy just at the beginning said, so you think we should have a recession? We can make that happen. Like,
I don't support that. But it's good for us. And
there's some incoherence. There's some inconsistency in the storyline here, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing, the virtual machine, the zero knowledge, and I'm still trying to wrap my mind around like what that's going to actually look like, because I think about the world computer, the global brain, and to me it just seems like they want to move more into a system where whatever devices we have are obviously connected to all the other devices, and it's almost like running as one computer. In a way, like we're all just nodes on a single computer that's running on a particular protocol or multiple. There won't just be one protocol, but they'll be layered protocols. But yeah. Anyways, I grabbed that one because I thought it was interesting.
I'm just thinking, from what he's not saying here, right? He's talking about, AI analytics, right? We can use it for that, like to stop the global financial crisis, because the banks will know each other's balance sheets better or something, which is fake. But if it was actually timely, what he would be saying would be things like, and we have these environmental, social governance protocols tied to the Sustainable Development Goals that are here to like stop the carbon, whatever, zero carbon. Like that's what you would expect him to say in terms of AI analytics. Like, oh, not just we're going to fix the banking crisis, but literally the AI is going to be used to run the human relationality to the environment through these governance protocols. And like everything is ESG investing now. So how is it that, and Google knows that because they're going to be running all this data. I mean, he just said that all of the data, the cloud storage, so much of Ethereum is in, these top 3 cloud servers, including Google. And so he knows what's going to go in. You think they don't have projections for the data for their cloud storage, that they haven't marketed it all out and say, okay, this is how much the ESG portfolios are going to need in terms of the impact tokens, and that they're not building it out? Like it just like, and you talk about like money and meaning, and I'm sitting here and I've devoted like 5 years of my life to doing stuff that I never thought I would do, to learn this stuff and not get paid a dime for it. And fortunately have stability that I don't have to get paid a dime to do it. And yet you have these bozos who are sitting up in front of rooms full of people who are not telling anywhere close to the true nature of what is happening. And they're, like if the places were switched, if I was some blockchain coder in that audience, pulling in a 6-figure plus salary multi times over, like I would have all this prestige. And yet the people who are sitting in the thing and getting the big salary and clapping for the should we have a recession? Oh, because we live in an insulated world. They're getting the money. Like, and not that I want their money. I mean, but it's hard to justify your like existence in society because we have decided to start to value people and their contributions by how much money they make, by how much social credibility they have, by what rooms that they get into. And yet, like the more you dig in and you see how lame, whether intentionally or unintentionally, these people are based on the stories they're occupying, it's really discouraging. Because for me, as someone who actually did well within the environment of the academic space or to a point, like I'm just disgusted with myself that I went along with it for so long. Like I'm 53 years old and I'm just like, I'm disgusted that I fell for it for so long. And then how do we come back out? Like, how do we then build an identity outside of this system of social capital, financial capital, prestige, the Truth Commission? Because when you know the truth, they hate you for it. Like when you know another part of the truth that they don't want pulled out into the open, you become the unlikable, rigid, inflexible person that no one likes.
Unstable,
anyway,
I think is the word you're looking for.
What?
Unstable, I think, is what you're looking for.
Nimble.
Yeah, I saw that video you did. That was cute. Okay, well, here's another one.
Yeah, well, we've also talked about where would AI approach, when I've mostly been working on AI stuff. Once you have the data, just think of the generative design, the sort of analytics, and we can talk about this if you're interested in it, but the eventual vision is a new set of apps that allow you to manage the system better. We were struck with, in 2008, 2009, that there were no uncorrelated assets, right? Well, that's something that should be easily discoverable, right, by your own technology running on the top of the things that you're building.
I thought the comment about uncorrelated assets might pique your interest, Alison. I mean, the idea that assets need to be correlated. What's the what was it?
What is it, like that's dark money or something? If it doesn't have, like, it's not trackable back to something, or
yeah,
I guess maybe I understand what that meant.
Yeah, I didn't have anything to say about that. I chose that clip because I thought you would, because I knew you did a thing about like, well, I was just thinking of it in terms of offsets. And I don't even know if that's what he meant necessarily, but I just
maybe it was signing things off the books. And and part of that, and this is the challenge, is that it's part of the trust narrative, right? Like, don't trust people, trust math. Don't trust people, everybody is rotten. Where I think realistically, most people are good. They're trapped in rotten situations that either they're, they're caught up in things where they have to live in a different story to get up and do their job or whatever. But I don't think most people are inherently untrustworthy or unethical, but they want us to believe it is so that then they can pull us into the accountability and transparency narrative, which can only be offered by the machine.
Right.
And so I do think that it's part of the trust and truth and math and not people. And they'll break things and they don't care who they hurt, like while they're breaking the thing to justify moving it into the machine age.
Well, I think that one of the things that breaks down that trust is a lack of real relationships, like real genuine relationships with people. And I think this whole system has been moving us away from unmediated relationship, with one another. So it's all through these systems of technological systems. And so I think so you do see a breakdown that happens because of that. And then they say, oh, well, we've got a solution to that. But really what needs to happen to fix that is like you said, like most people are good if they know each other and they actually, like, if people that were actually neighbors or whatever, and you kind of have to have community, even like where I live, it's people are constantly moving, there's no real community, but like so I've spent a lot of time in Philly with Sherry Honkala, and like in those neighborhoods, like people actually like get to know each other for like long periods of time. And also because of their situation, there's kind of forced to have a little bit, it felt like there's a little bit more community there. Like it's not your typical community. It's a little different than what people think of, but I think that, being in presence, like physical presence with other people is really important for relationship building. And I just think a lot about how we've been pulled apart physically and even like ideologically through the media and through all these intermediaries that are inserting themselves into our lives. And so, but then people can look like, yeah, people are untrustworthy, and it's because there's a reason for that, and there's a problem there that needs to be solved. But you're not actually addressing what the problem is, and it's not just that people are by naturally untrustworthy, and you know what I mean, like that's the story that we're told, but I don't think that's the case,
And I don't think if they come up with some new techno solution that BlackRock is necessarily all of a sudden going to play by all the rules, right? Like the thing is, the people who break the rules are going to break the new rules just like they broke the old rules, and no one's going to hold them accountable. Like,
the people you have to worry about aren't necessarily people that are going to break the rules. It's the people that are writing the rules. And that's kind of what I think is even more important, because they're always talking about, oh, we got to protect your data. We got to protect your privacy. We got to watch out for the hackers. Someone's going to break in and steal your stuff. And I'm like, I'm far more concerned about Google than I am some foreign government or somebody else, like some other, criminal or whatever, like hacking into their system. To me, my problem is with the system itself. And the people who actually write those protocols and set these things, has set up the game. Yeah.
Like what if we just don't even want to be in this game? Like, I don't want a more accountable games board. I don't want to be on the game board. Like this isn't my choice. But
that's not an option. Yeah. You're already out of the game.
We should step outside the labyrinth. Maybe we should aim to try to get outside the labyrinth.
Absolutely. Okay.
So a note of caution on Web 2. And by the way, when we were doing this, we didn't call it Web 2. We just called it the web. What happened, let's see if I can describe it. We all started with a notion of true decentralization, true empowerment of individuals. All of the things that I did 25 years ago involving Mosaic and the internet and HTML, all this kind of stuff was presumed of the fact that the world would become disaggregated, that everyone have equal access, all the stuff, all that religion stuff. And we believed it, and I really believed it. And if you look at the structure today of what you think of as Web 2, it's highly concentrated around relatively proprietary systems. And that's not what we started off in. So if you look at it in the arc of my career over 20 years, the same thing could happen to you. And you go, oh my God, that would be terrible. But let me tell you how it might happen. This is not a prediction. There are economic benefits and returns to scale. And you have really clever entrepreneurs who are very, very smart. They're moving quickly, they create value, and they can begin to merge and acquire things, right? And there are also technical benefits to centralization. Because of the Sybil effect, the truly distributed systems spend the vast majority, estimates are up to 90% of their time, making sure there isn't an interloper in the protocol, right? So and there are technical solutions to that. So you've got a system where it spends an awful lot of time making sure there aren't other people around. It's perfectly possible that that could lead to a small number of high-end, large players. So I don't think Web3 is immune from the kind of centralization that surprised me. Now, I was also one of the people who caused it, so I'm not trying to mislead you. But the economic incentives, the scale incentives, and the technology incentive itself tend to favor centralization. So one thing for you all to do is to make a map of what you think of Web3 will be, and then figure out which points will be centralized, which points will be regulated, and which ones will be wide open. The history of technology is they start completely wide open, and then there are centralizers, there are consolidators. There is probably a set of consolidators that will get either built, founded, or will come into the space and provide that to some of the infrastructure.
The consolidator.
Where do we start? I mean, you have the founder of Google sitting there talking, oh, we really believed in just like power to the people, and you know, it's painful. I mean, like who really believes this guy? I mean, come on. Oh, and then I just fell into it, and oh, next thing I know, we like dominate the world. You know, there's another clip I got coming up where it's like we were really fighting against the tactics of Microsoft, who were, you know, like antitrust. It's like Google, hello, don't be evil. I mean, I think that was like a joke. It was a joke.
No, it was
from the beginning. Yeah, I don't think it was like, oh, well, I mean, at one point, if you really believe in those values, you walk away from it.
Right.
You know, if you really have, if you have a set of principles and you really believe in that, then at some point, you know, then you realize, oh, this isn't what I thought it was, and I'm not going to do this anymore. You don't just be like, well, fuck it, I'm full in.
Well, I mean, the thing is, like, it came out of ARPA, right? I mean, it was never the people, like, and before ARPA, like, even if you sort of step back from that, it clearly was going on the idea of the world sensorium, the global brain, the collective consciousness, the noosphere, whether that's Teilhard de Chardin or Vernadsky or Julian Huxley or, you know, Fritz Kunst and Reiser. I mean, they had this sense that this aggregation was coming, and in order to get the centralized funding to make it happen, because they're like, oh yeah, and then people just have good ideas and then they scale it. No, that money is put in to make the market the way it is. It doesn't just happen. None of this just happens. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, I remember, you know, back when you was groomed up on, you know, George Lucas's Star Wars, and, you know, at some point they go, well, you know, we're actually the empire, right? Like, you know, and I remember like going, you know, being a kid and going in a mall and like standing in some long line to see the star, and like they're grooming you to think that you're not the empire, but you actually are totally the empire. And George Lucas would like to get in your consciousness with some tokens, but you know, that all of this thing is interlocking, and I think that's, I mean, we've talked about it. Like, this is one of the things my family gets so frustrated. They're like, it's not all interconnected, and I'm like, it's kind of all interconnected, guys. Like, it really actually is this emergent structure. Now, is it all interconnected and everybody's evil and wrong? No.
Right. But not everyone, you know, and like, it's not even that people even are all in on it either. It's like they don't even know what it is they're a part of. Like,
and I think that's why we're trying to sort of put out this lens of talking about, you know, Web3, social impact finance, metadata soul-bound tokens towards collective singularity as like, we'll try this lens on, and then like look back to the 60s and see how that looks again with this lens on, and then project forward like 10 years based on the conversation that, you know, these folks are having in the room, and see how it fits together for you, because this is how it looks to us. And if you can say it like that, then you don't have to get waddled up in a bunch of ideology or flag waving or, you know, anarcho flags, or, you know, like you can just let all of that fall away and just actually look at what has happened. You know, I don't see it any other way, but yeah, no, it's ridiculous for him to imply that they just were out for the people. Like, I would love it if some of these people actually did just say what it is, like to say, like, actually, we came into this space and we knew that there was this goal of a collective hive mind. I mean, Melanie Swan does pretty much say it, right? She doesn't hide it, but she's not in these big rooms. You know, yeah, like back in the teens, we were really interested in psychical phenomena and collective consciousness. And as the theoretical physics stuff like emerged, we saw that there was stuff in this fourth dimension, and we wanted to like interleave these things. And, you know, then we were exploring MK Ultra, and then we thought we could get there with, you know, some synthetic biology and some technology, but it all had to be interconnected with the right packet switching mechanisms. And we needed to make sure no one was left behind so that everybody had the right unique identifier so we could find them in the network. And like, just be honest, you know, like, let's just lay it out of what it actually was. Like, hey, that Emmanuel Swedenborg guy was wandering around in the realms, you know, and we thought maybe everybody should be able to do that too. So like now Palantir is going to invest in all their psychedelics, and we'll just give everybody whatever trip they want, you know, with their personalized, you know, psychedelic medicine, you know, towards this thing. Like, just say it. Like, why are they just getting up there and saying a bunch of nonsense that, I don't know, it doesn't really, it's not, I mean, there's stuff in there. I don't mean to say that like there's nothing in these clips, but it's not talking about the juicy parts.
Right. Well, there is some stuff which, like he says, you know, you need to make sure you understand like what part is going to be, you know, open to everybody, and what part is going to be, you know, centralized, what part's going to be decentralized. That's what he's talking about. What part's going to be centralized, what part's going to be decentralized.
It's all their game.
What part's going to be? It's all their game, right? It's
all their game. So like they're going to give us a perception that we can be a player in their game,
right,
but it's still their game.
Yeah. Well, I heard an example of like nation states, you know, where they're like, you know, they're going to control all the real levers of power, but they'll let you create your own stamp or something like that, you know, like they'll let you do some fucking meaningless thing that doesn't actually affect where the real power is.
Or holiday,
you know, but yeah, you're right. It's all their game. Here's one on Web3 protocol.
I really think that the difference in Web3 is that it's about creating open markets for those compute workloads, for all of that, right? So the success of a protocol for me isn't that it centralizes the value of the compute or the control in one group like a mining pool. It's that it successfully creates a market where people efficiently bid against each other to create more efficiency, more security, often through some form of formalized reputation. So I think the real difference is that, yes, those big companies could get, you know, better deals on hardware, better deals on data centers, better deals on cooling, better deals on human capital, better deals on a bunch of things. But I think the real question is that if you make a market, how does that market evolve when all you need is very proven inputs, very proven uptime? And that's what I think Web3 reputation systems really do. There's actually a very poor name for them as reputation systems, because Web2 reputation systems fundamentally suck, because like the intern can make a 5-star review and everyone now has 5-star reviews. But Web3 reputation systems together with the market can become efficient. Does that make sense?
They do, until you have an evil actor. So I spent, I don't know, a decade of my life fighting Microsoft at the heyday of its consolidation, including antitrust, 1996, 1997, all this kind of stuff. And Microsoft's tactics at the time, they don't do this anymore, included not allowing competitor access to the platforms, various pricing strategies, all of which were subject to antitrust rules, and all of which has been discussed at length by my generation. So the internet comes along, and Cisco, for a while, had more than 50% of control over the net. But Cisco didn't use the same business tactics as Microsoft. And I kept wondering why. Now, partly it's because it's different people, different leadership, but also because it was a protocol network incentive as opposed to an app control incentive, if you see the distinction. So to the degree that your observation is about network scale and protocol, it won't end up being dominated or taken over by a proprietary player. In other words, your vision is correct. To the degree that somebody can come in with significant money, significant network power, and change the protocol to exclude competitors, right? Then you'll have trouble. And again, you have a model of Web3 as protocol network-based, and obviously I like that a lot. I would be very careful in the design of those future layer 2 or whatever is called layer 3 protocols to make sure that they fully affect and realize the vision you outlined.
So again, they're talking about, everyone playing by the same rules in the game through the protocol, and we want to make sure those protocols can't be changed. But again, we create the protocol. We're creating the protocol. And I think that goes back.
An evil actor, Eric Schmidt.
I know, unless you have like an evil actor. Yeah, that was pretty funny. And then he's bringing up like, oh, the evil Bill Gates and Microsoft for antitrust. I'm like, I think we need something like that again now with Google. So,
well, I would say too, just in the things left unsaid, is they're framing markets and open markets as the way, I don't know, like a regular member of the public would understand a market, right? Like, oh, human capital and pools of energy are, software, hardware, whatever, competing for, like, that's how most people would be like, oh, a business, and you have a market and these are pieces of the business. But like, what I find really troubling now is finding out about creating and the idea of machines, right? Because they're not really talking about the next iteration of computation, which is through these nano and micro electromechanical systems, right? Like, we're used to thinking of computers as going from the size of a room to, the size of a small television to, a tablet to a phone. But most people are not imagining nanomachines as computational devices. Like, we don't have any common knowledge of what that even looks like. Now, if you're in the computing space, you know exactly what that looks like, because that's what Web3 is going to run on, is the nano and micro electromechanical machines. And they're tiny. Like, I don't even know how you see a nano electromechanical system, but they're building them, right? And so when they talk about things as though, oh, it's the same as you would have imagined it in 2000. No, it's totally different. Like, the physics are different, the materials are different, the things of scale, and they want to go in your body. They would like to create economies through biocomputation, like literally make that an economy. Like, everybody's got multiple economies, gamified economies running in their body on nanotechnology. And that's very straightforward things that they're talking about in the synthetic biology space. Now they talk about it for like longevity or, like various things like that for your own good. But like, I think that's a much more, like, I would like, where are the people having those conversations? Where is Google Alphabet and their health protocols, right? And their all of that bit in with thinking about markets and how the gamified of, like, all of life is being gamified according to markets, that everything is a market, right? We often use that clip about the fungus and the phosphorus and the root. Like, that's a market. Everything can be considered an open market. And the people who are out there more on the libertarian free market side, they don't know about gamified biochemical transactions in your body. Like they might actually revisit the free market idea with tokens, and if they actually knew the bigger picture, the deeper picture. But we're never getting there with this superficial level of like discussion, because everyone is talking about as though we actually understand the current status, but it's spoken of as though it was the same status of 10 or 20 years prior, and it isn't.
Yeah. Well, I got to admit, I still don't quite understand the, how that looks or how that's going to work. I mean, I know there's a lot of work being done on it in those spaces, but I don't even understand that piece of it, even though I've listened to some of the stuff you've done, and I still don't know. But this particular clip where he's talking about we're incentivizing the oracles to provide correct information, make sure it's faster, it's more efficient. I still think that's relevant in terms of Web3 and the new system, regardless of whatever happens with the the nanoparticles in the biospace.
Like there's the German guy, and he was talking about when you have nanotechnology, like you want cybersecurity protocols that not the wrong thing is getting in, right? So maybe the Oracle is saying like is linked to whatever they call antibodies or something like that. Like, oh, that's a good one. Oh, that's a bad one. That's like, it's this fractal, this Mandelbrot fractal thing is like that which could apply to a neighborhood or a city economy could also apply to your own internal biological system, and it's the same. It's a matter of scale, but the same economics are in place. And I don't know how far back this goes in terms of people who are working in NEMS and MEMS and biocomputation, but that's the stuff that goes back to the ODOMs. That's why that Atomic Ecologies series was so important, is that the way in which they were tagging things with radioisotopes and looking at energy economics throughout ecosystems, and then man being embedded in the ecosystem, is a direct correlation from that. Maybe now it's not a radioisotope, maybe it's some other kind of nanomachine, self-assembling particle, but they got the system set up during the Cold War. And what I've said in my last blog post is I feel like we are entering a World War III, but it is a soft coup of life. It's this quiet, low grade, civilizing force, like a cybernetic civilizing force that we're supposed to walk into the embrace of this for trust and safety and, social justice reasons, that we're supposed to turn ourselves over to the machine.
Right. Yeah, and obviously they're not going to say that in this talk. But I have two more quick clips, and then we'll wrap up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting in your world, in the people that I've talked with, I'll use my kind of language, which I must seem old to them. And my kind of language is, gaining market share, dominance, and so forth. And they say, well, that's not appropriate. So that's a different generation of leaders and a different set of language. So the question is, when it's not appropriate, but it's in someone's financial incentive to do it, will they change their mind? And I don't think we know yet.
I think it's appropriate. We are the standard for oracles, and we dominate that market because we make the best system. I'm totally comfortable with that. You guys good with that? I'm good with it.
But you've done it in such a way that you haven't excluded your competitors. You haven't killed anybody. No, I haven't killed anybody. I'm not that crazy yet. I haven't got there yet. But if we'll see. Talk to me in a few years. If it keeps going at this pace, who knows? I'm just kidding. I think it's basically because you run the whole company on Zoom, and Zoom will kill you. Maybe you should have some in-person meetings.
I'll think about it.
We've had this conversation privately before.
I'll definitely think about it. We're not planning to kill anybody, just so we're on the same page. That's not the plan. Great.
So, I mean, that clip, the thing that I found interesting was just the beginning of a discussion about like, oh, the old way was market dominance and the new way is what, the stakeholder capitalism or whatever. You've got to take into account these other things. You've got to have to, but it's actually, they're doing both. It's not either or. And I don't think that other thing's going to completely go away either. It's like, having a holistic look on the not in a good way, but in understanding like what is actually coming. But I just thought that was interesting because he was like, Eric Schmidt was kind of leading him into this thing, and then he was like, yeah, but we do dominate the market.
Yeah.
And I was like, and we're really happy about that. But he's like, but then you don't, you allow the competitors, but he hasn't had to kill anybody yet, so that's good.
No, we keep up appearances. Well, I would say, so yesterday I went and I did 2 site visits out on the main line, and one of them was at the B Lab where they developed the protocols to credential the benefit corporations, which are these new kinds of companies that are for the new kind of economy. And the thing that's important to note, and it was interesting revisiting something I looked at 4 or 5 years ago, and seeing it with all the new information that I have, that there are very close ties between Wharton Business School at Penn and Silicon Valley. Like it's very integrated. And many of the people who have Wharton ties live on the main line. They don't live in the city of Philadelphia. They live in the nice suburbs, fancier suburbs. And so B Lab was set up with Rockefeller and Prudential insurance money, largely $5 million each, in 2007. And so they knew this was coming. The global crash. They're setting up the new economy. They need to shift from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And if you look at my, and maybe we can throw this image in, like when you drop it in. There's a really egregious drawing that was part of their annual report where they actually showed the evolution of the businessman from like an ape up into like a guy, it's just like the guy with the top hat, and at the end they're like, but I'm a stakeholder capitalist. I'm the good kind of capitalist. And it's just it's quite crass, but it just shows you, and it's called the Declaration of Interdependence. And again, that is the we don't want to dominate, we just want to be interdependent with you, right? We just want to have our distributed protocol and open source so we can all save the world and solve poverty. And I don't know, I'm just looking at that. And the other thing is so when they thought they were going to get the benefit corporation model legislation in California under Governor Schwarzenegger, and that didn't happen. He ended up vetoing it at the last minute. Eventually it came back in, and there are many states that have these benefit corporation laws on the books, and there's 5,000 or 6,000 of them that have been credentialed officially. But the interesting thing about the laws, the model law, is that I believe that legally regular corporations they can be sued by their shareholders if they do not maximize profit. So if they do something that someone says, you should have done this differently because my dividends were cut because you weren't as aggressive or whatever, they can be liable in court. And so what the benefit corporation says is that in the new model, that doesn't apply to boards as long as you're doing things for the public good. Okay. So now think about the wiggle room that gives certain corporations that, get tagged as meeting the standards of public good. Then they don't have to be driven by profit, which I'm not saying everything should be driven by profit either, but they've got a lot more loopholes to work with in terms of what they want to do loss leaders. So maybe this loss leading stuff isn't just now the philanthropy, or what are the catalytic capital, people who are planning on putting money in, knowing they're not going to get it right away. They've got a 30-year time horizon to build the market, like the people like Andreessen and all of that, Andreessen Horowitz. So now they can have benefit corporations do that too. And so that's online. And how many people do you hear talking about benefit corporations, right? Maybe you hear about a public-private partnership, but you're not hearing about this new corporate structure. And I think that some of this is actually going to interleave with the industrial banking system. And the thing that I forgot to mention earlier is in the pivot, because I think we're going to shift from greedy, crass Ayn Rand libertarians into the more Ethereum, green, sustainable, egalitarian mode, cooperative mode. There's going to be this pivot that one of the early leaders in the digital identity space was actually coming from credit bureau or credit unions, which I couldn't quite understand at the time. I was like, oh, the credit unions, how are they involved in digital identity? But I think it's going to feed into this complementary currency, community currency. Like, look, we're not Bank of America, we're a credit union. How dangerous can we be, right? And it's decentralized and distributed, but once it's networked, it's in the network. You're still stuck in their game. You're stuck in their game. So, anyway, that's what struck me, is that it's going to be not cool to be the dominator, even though he did jump excitedly onto that. And that's probably the role that he plays, is to be the excited guy who's dominating. Schmidt is the old guy. He's like, no. Like, the new thing is like to not be to be the play nice so that we can all get along. Because there's enough in the network for everyone if we manage it right. And I'll just say too, I don't know if you noticed, but like over the chairs, the banner, like the thing is called Smart Con. Literally, it's Smart Con. it's like wink, wink. Yeah, we've got the Smart Con going on.
I didn't even think about that.
I know, it's kind of funny. I don't know like what the deal is with their little logo with the circles and the black cube. I mean, clearly the black cube is always like out there. What is the Saturn box or something?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I like my cons to be smart. I don't like the dumb cons. I might catch on. Well, and it's interesting because even with I watched that thing you did with the B Corp, but even there, like, well, one telling thing was like we couldn't get it in liberal California, so we had to go to Delaware. I was like, wait, what? That was kind of telling to me too. Like that was like, that was interesting, but but they even find ways to make money, with impact finance. You can even make money doing good.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I've lived this. I mean, that's the thing. Like, what did you say? Like Judy Wicks, and that's the thing that's, again, with the esoterics. Judy Wicks is like the godmother of green everything in Philadelphia. And she owned like the first farm to table restaurant in the 80s that is called the White Dog Cafe that just happened to be in Madame Blavatsky's house. Of the Theosophist stuff. Like, oh, I just happened to buy the Theosophist house, and it just happens to be like a block and a half between Wharton, the Nanotechnology Center, and the Worcester Institute, and ENIAC, where the ENIAC computer was made. Just happened. And it just happened to be like the leading, green, sustainable guy. And like, who's the guy? Corton? Is it David Corton? Like, yeah, they hang out together, like with their local sustainable communities, and they're going to have their complementary currency of like tokens and good behavior tokens. And, and the thing is, it's going to be set up. Like I just had an exchange with, I got motivated since yesterday. I was at the place of my origin of my activism with the William Penn Foundation, and this estate, the Haas family estate. And I said, hey, like, I'm looking back on my trajectory. Like, I fell into this with the school closures that were linked to this foundation. I'm sitting here in this, it's now a public garden thinking about all this. Do you want a briefing on LearnCard and on blockchain? Because these people that are lovely people, but, I was hanging with them 6 years ago and they haven't moved a bit. Like, they show up diligently at every school board meeting and they're having the same conversation they had 6 years ago. And I said, it's all about the charter schools, darn it, stop it. And the bad school reform commission and the charter schools. And I said, listen, like, I know you all consider yourselves good liberals, right? They're coming after all of the children of the world with AI, like, and the environment. So do you want a briefing on LearnCard? And I did have one person say, yeah, there's stuff to learn. And look, here's this great information about a history tour of, the civil rights movement in Germantown, right? Here's some, and I'm like, yeah, but that's going to be your Pokemon Go badges. They're going to, yeah, that's the new model. Like, In-Q-Tel is going to be like, look at augmented reality, like civil rights in Philadelphia. Go collect your badges on the LearnCard, and maybe you can, get some kale for your family for dinner. Like, that's how this thing is going to move. But you have to make sure that you perform your demonstration of social justice appropriately, right? Like, make sure, because in immersive reality, the drone, like, how well can you regurgitate back how you're supposed to think about this? And then that's really messed up. Is that what we're going to decide to do? Like, not to dismiss that those aren't important attributes of history, that stories that we should know. But the reality is that AI is going to want to watch you perform these values for me, so I can be more humanized and we can get those tokens. And it's a very complicated conversation to have, because like the learning curve is such that like literally everyone is simply incentivized to stay on the road they're on because they know that road.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the incentives. That's really what it's about. It's like doing something that you're that you're not being incentivized by some social credit
people,
token.
I think it's certainly not money, but it's social well-being, right? Oh, if I step off this road, then I'm going to be like Alison. Ugh. And nobody likes Alison. So like, I don't want to step off the road, because then, who knows what might happen. Then I'll have to be responsible for thinking my own thoughts. So I'm just going to stay here because I know this. This is the thing I know.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, too, and just like seeing the inner relationship between all these things, look, I came into this from being starting to be critical at nonprofits and NGOs, and just seeing how that they are an extension of the governmental and corporate, partnership. I mean, before the PPPs, public-private partnerships, like existed officially, they were already there. Like it was those relationships were already there. They just formalized it. They're like, hey, let's create this new legal structure or whatever. And so seeing the B Corporation is just like it's another thing on that road. Yeah. Well, I got one more clip here.
I have a simple rule, which is if you give me 100 million users, I can make money from them. Trust me, right? If they're doing something, I can find a way to monetize it using, again, traditional Web 2 techniques. What is the same answer on top of Web 3? Because in your vision, Web 3 will be universal across the globe. It'll be used in some form by almost everyone. So one way when we initially were doing Google, our goal was we want a little piece of Google in everyone's computation, right? So, for example, the DNS that you use is almost certainly the Google DNS, right? Google, roughly a third of the world's internet traffic goes through, I think that's still the number, through Google Fiber. You would never know that. Now, are these gifts to the world? Yes, thank you very much. But they were also in our direct financial interest because it meant that we knew what was going on.
Whoa.
Yeah, having a piece of computation of every computation is a good idea. I'm on board.
Yeah.
I'm on board with that plan. It's a solid plan.
Yes. Is there any particular reason why you can't just announce that that's your plan right now to your customers? We want everyone here to have a piece of Chainlink in everything that you do.
That's the plan. As long as we provide the security you need and the systems that you need, we should win on that basis. And if we provide the most secure, best system for you to build your application, then we should absolutely have the ability to provide that compute to Web3. I think that's exactly right. That's the standard we'll need to meet, and that's the standard Google met very, very impressively. And that's just kind of, at certain size and speed, the name of the game. So I think that's, once again, thank you for getting to the core of the issue, for telling everybody my plan.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that private?
No, it wasn't. I was just talking about it for like an hour. No.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of relevant. We want a piece of it. We want to be in everything. We want to be in everything, which is actually like antithetical to what most people think of as the idea of decentralization. I mean, having one company have a piece of everything goes against what most people think decentralization is. So it's interesting because the language, how the language tricks you. I was tricked by it. Like, I'm like, hell yeah, decentralize everything. Let's go with it. But that's not what this is.
No. I feel like that was a spell. I know that's kind of silly, but like Eric, let's tell the plan, right? Let's Chainlink and everything. Like they just tell you. I mean, they literally call it Chainlink. I don't know how much clearer it has to be. And in the fact that they're not open, like Google saying like, yeah, you probably don't know that Google Fiber runs all this stuff. Like, thank you, a gift to the world. No, that is their infrastructure. And it's about, I think, invisible. It's about the invisibility and the convenience. And that's what Google is so good at, right? Is to make it, invite you to accept its convenience and integrate it into your life in such ways that until at some point the trap closes, right? And then they say, oh, we've scanned all your emails and we've decided that you've hit some threshold of inappropriate discussion points, and then we're going to just wipe it with no notice or something like that. Like they create this invitation of convenience, and then but it's a dependence, and it's comprehensive. That was very much within the education space. I said, this is not good. Like, we shouldn't be allowed. Oh, it's free. It's so convenient. It's easy. It helps me differentiate. No, it's sucking your brain for the sentiment analysis. And, and I'm not perfect. I still have Google products, but again, it's like these contracts, so what are the other options? You have to be much more knowledgeable. You've been navigating, the Linux stuff, and even that has its own, it's embedded with the digital identity. So it's not, I don't know how we get out of the tangle, but yeah, they're doubling down. It is, what is it, like Gulliver's Travel with the Lilliputians? The guy is like laying down and he's got all the ropes. I mean, that's what I feel like we're, one by one, the little clamps are being pinned down and staked into this ground, and they're like, don't you love us yet? Here's some more convenience. How do you like this interoperability? Open source and like every single thing. And then we're like, I can't move, Well,
and then they change the terms, at the beginning, it's great. And then next thing you know, you're like, you're under a different contract than you signed up for, and you didn't even see it happen. and now it's going to be automated. And you're not going to be able to complain to anybody. Yeah, it still blows my mind, that whole space, because, I go around that space and there's so many people who actually think this is literally the opposite of what it is. It's pretty wild.
See, I think that has to do with us not being prepared to understand, at least in the US, like as an imperial project. Somebody sent me an email. They're like, look at this video. This person will know exactly what you're talking about because they seem to have some understanding of like human plus technology or whatever. But the whole thing was branded with giant waving flags, giant, like multiple. And I said, we're not in the same story. Because this person, and they had good intentions. They're like, I'm hearing something from this person that sounds like things you're saying. But I'm like, no, look again. Because the story I'm saying wouldn't come with big waving flags, because the metaverse isn't a big flag waving process. That is a distraction. And in fact, the flag that we're covering ourselves in is the flag of empire that created the Googles, the Niantics, the ARPANETs, the packet switching, the MITs, the Stanfords, the things that are going to lull you into the CIA's video game with the most sophisticated level of behavioral analytics and psychometrics than you can imagine, with the best special effects of Hollywood. And they want you to want it. And that is all about building the new empire. And that's us. Yeah, sure. It's got, other people are building their own versions of the empire. But for us here in the United States, we can't get out from under that. Nobody did this to us. We grew up in it, and we were told stories about what it was that we were living in. And if you try on a different lens, it starts to look really different. And I think we don't have to do it. Cliff's been very helpful. It doesn't have to make people wrong or to say that there's no way out, but we can't get out until we actually know what we were in the first place. And for me, I think that situating it within a history helps.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it absolutely has to be seen in the context of history, empire, conquest, colonization. I don't think you can see it if you don't make that connection. Actually, I don't think it's possible to even see what it is without having that lens,
Yeah.
So
maybe we'll get there. I don't know.
we'll keep trying. I mean, I'm in my process, it's a process.
Well, and everybody's at different places. I mean, and I'm not the most patient with people. I'll admit that. Like, I'm just like, guys, I've been doing this for 5 years. Come on, like really hard for 2.5. Like, come on. And they're just, it's because we're habituated. Like, we have reinforced like muscle memory, neural memory. We just have the ways we're used to doing it. And they're like, I can't, I'm stretching, but I can't wrap my head around what it is you're saying exactly, because it would make my head explode. And
yeah, well, I mean, there's been times where that you've been harsh with me, but I stopped and I'm like, but she's right, like I'm like, this is I actually agree with your analysis. I actually agree that this is what's going on, and to me that's the most important thing. We need to face this. We need to deal with this. We need to understand it, and and I know that every time that you are short with people, I understand that you're coming from a place of like, I think there's a lot of frustration, but like a place of wanting people to understand, like, no, don't there's this, there's this thing coming and you have to like understand what it is, because it's going to run you over and you're not even gonna know what the hell happened. And so, yeah.
I mean, I would just reinforce this learn card, because they're after the next generation. Granted, it's also probably going to be reskilling workers who are put out of work by automation and stuff. So it's not going to be just kids. But this idea that the Learning Economy Foundation, Colorado, C-Lab, right? Y'all are the pilot state, you and Broward and maybe Singapore, but like it's Broward County, Florida, and Colorado. Learning Economy, and they're setting up the blockchain card that will be your passport, your biometric ID, your QR code, your behavioral thing tied to script, tied to money, earn points. And it's not just going to be like Class Dojo where little kids have good behavior points and they can buy accessories for their cartoon character avatar version. It's actually going to matter. And I had, actually, maybe this is the next blog post I need to read. It was about like social capital script. And it was actually talking about a group in Massachusetts where they were setting up like a leaderboard currency, like kind of like recycle bank points, but for volunteering, for being, and it was the case study that they presented, which was later scrubbed, but I have screenshots, was of a mom, single mom in a Boston suburb who couldn't afford, was scraping by, didn't have enough, but she could earn points picking up trash at the playground while her kids played on the equipment. She could earn points to tutor after school in the kids' classroom. But all of these points, if you put an actual dollar per hour value on it, it would be like she'd be making like 60 cents an hour. Like it was like nothing anywhere even close to minimum wage, but it was framed as a social good, as volunteering.
And then she can only use it for certain things.
Her bus pass. Yeah. Like then she could use it for her bus pass to get to her 2 jobs, right? And then the people behind this were literally in bed with KIPP, which is the Knowledge is Power Charter School, which I keep saying, guys, it's a no excuses charter school where you have to behave properly, be rigid, earn your right to have a uniform, earn your right to have a desk, track the people with your eyes, move your hands a certain way, act like a robot, don't have any social behaviors, act like a machine. And literally they want to KIPP the world. I keep coming back to this because education is my point, and there's a reason. It's because they're after life itself, and they want to learn us. And that learn card, the learning economy, the UN, these credits, and that's why that position I took with Derek Bros mattered. The digital child labor mattered. They're going to have these kids play crypto games and call them badge token things tied to script. And they're going to triple it up and say, look how wonderful we're doing for these kids in Latin America. They can play games and learn about protein folding and get some money for the mini mart.
Right. Because they don't have any other options. So the idea that then we need to come up with some other options, like that's just off the table. Again, it's like building things, even if you have good intentions, building on top of bad structures, bad foundations, and nobody stops and says, hey, maybe the thing that this is built on is not good. And we shouldn't just, we shouldn't build another story on top of it, which is what this is. This is building, let's make that skyscraper taller, through, they even call it layered, the layered protocols. But if you think about it, it is layered. Even this is layered on top of the economic protocols that aren't digital, that we've been living with for hundreds of years, that are very, very problematic, that I've been thinking about for a long time. And I don't know. I've never found a solution. People are like, which one do you support? I'm like, I've yet to find one that doesn't carry a lot of baggage with it. But
the power concentration right now, like, there's no way to talk about something being decentralized within the current environment of BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard.
Right.
And the fact that these tokenomics are going to be linked to good behaviors and linked to biometric wearables, and all of it is going to be synced in some sort of sine waves and frequency modulations. Like, no, like, until that gets addressed at a global scale, whatever you dance around the edges is not going to touch it. If BlackRock's Aladdin is running the algorithms, we're not getting there. So
yeah, no, it's if you even scratch the surface, it's the narrative just totally falls apart. But we'll keep scratching and scratching over here. Exactly. Well, thanks again, Alison, and we'll there's a lot more I want to do on this, because there's a lot of other clips like that I've actually want to go through, and that's kind of thing I've been focusing
on complementary currency or community currencies, and like your retrospective on how you understood it and what the technological implications are now, because I had found that paper about the place in Finland that was this demonstration art digital media project of a local currency that just so happened to be on an island with an open air prison, a progressive prison. And it was melding art and mapping of social values and the prisoners. And it was quite interesting. And I think that with a few of these other, like the Descent video, and that could be really interesting, because I believe that's where the pendulum is swinging. We're swinging away from I don't know how long it's going to take, but the Ayn Rand libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, blah, blah, blah people are being set up to be knocked down by the complementary currency tokenized governance protocol. And so let's reflect on some of that. Like the Descent, they were talking about something connected to Bolsa Familia in Brazil, like a Las Palmas bank or something like that, a community bank. So that would be pretty interesting, I think.
Well, and I should revisit. I probably have a dozen books back here just on complementary currencies, because I was really into that for a while. And the biggest proponent out there, the most vocal, visible proponent, was Bernard Lietaer. But I always was like, he helped create the euro, and I was like, did he have like a conscious awakening, like, oh wow, like this is wrong what we're doing here, and now like learning about how they're integrating that into these new systems, I'm like, oh wait a minute, I need to go back and revisit this whole thing. But there's actually tons of talks online, and like I said, I've promoted his work like a great deal over the years.
Well, you don't know what you don't know till you know it. Like that's by design. I mean, because they want us to do the work for them. Like they want us to be its salespeople. Like all the people at East Denver, they're being the salespeople for this stuff. They don't really know what they're selling. Yeah. They don't know the full story about what they're selling.
Right. Well, and they'll have their pet projects that they really, really like, but they're not seeing this. I mean, a lot of them do see. I mean, you go there, you'll be like, oh yeah, Charles Hoskinson. He's a bad guy. We don't like what he's doing. But we've got our little pet project, and a lot of times it's dealing with art or something that's fun, we want to help the homeless people or whatever. But they're not seeing that this is actually going to be a whole new system of governance that's outside of traditional forms of governance. So that we're not gonna, you'll have your little, maybe you might get a like a token vote or something.
Yeah.
Big deal.
I'm pretty sure Andreessen Horowitz has most of the tokens.
Yeah. Well, they have other systems where, they say it'll be one person, one vote. But even if with that, within that framework, there are problems because, people can be manipulated, and like there's certain things that like you shouldn't get to vote on, period. Like, it's just like, anyways, so there's a lot of layers to it. Anyways, we'll do this again. Thank you,
All right.
Alison.
Bye,
Bye.
Jason.